"Empty your pockets, boy, or we'll strap you down," Captain Marshall barked, looming over Adrian Scott in seat 1A. Beside him, Sheila the purser smirked, clutching the plastic zip ties, eager to humiliate the thug in the hoodie who dared to sit in first class. To them, Adrian was just a security threat to be neutralized. But they were making a catastrophic miscalculation. They didn't know that the man they were threatening didn't just buy a ticket, he had bought the entire airline 3 hours ago. And while they were busy playing God at 30,000 feet, Adrian wasn't texting a lawyer. He was texting the tower to have security waiting on the tarmac, not for him, but to strip the captain of his wings forever. The rain was hammering against the glass walls of JFK Terminal 4, turning the runway lights into smeared streaks of neon. Adrian Scott adjusted the hood of his charcoal sweatshirt, pulling it slightly lower. He wasn't hiding. He was just exhausted. 48 hours. That's how long he'd been awake, closing the most complex merger in the history of Scott Logistics. At 34, Adrian was the youngest black billionaire in the logistics sector, a ghost in the machine of global shipping. He didn't do press conferences. He didn't do flashy Instagram posts, and he certainly didn't dress like he was worth 10 figures. Tonight, he wore comfortable joggers, scuffed sneakers, and a vintage hoodie from his alma mater, Howard University. He just wanted to sleep. He had booked a last-minute first-class ticket on Regal Horizon Airlines, flight RH-42 to Zurich, boarding Group 1 first class, and Diamond status members only. The gate agent announced. Adrian stood up, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and joined the queue. Ahead of him stood a man who looked like the caricature of wealth, a beige cashmere coat, slicked back hair, and a frantic energy shouting into an iPhone about shorting the stock. This was Chad Bentley. Adrian stepped up behind him. As Chad scanned his pass and breezed through, Adrian stepped forward. The gate agent, a woman named Brenda, who looked like she'd been chewing the same piece of gum since 1998, didn't even look at his scanner. She looked at his chest, then his face. "Sir, economy boarding is in 20 minutes. Please step aside." Adrian paused, holding out his phone with the QR code visible. "I'm in Group 1 seat, 1A. Brenda sighed, a long, theatrical exhale that signaled her annoyance to everyone within a 30-foot radius. "Sir, please don't make a scene. Group 1 is for our premium flyers. If you try to board early, the scanner will reject you. Why don't we let the machine decide?" Adrian said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. He didn't wait for her permission. He placed his phone on the reader. Beep, beep. Green light. Brenda blinked. She looked at the screen, then at Adrian, then back at the screen. There was no apology. No. "Enjoy your flight." She just pursed her lips and snatched his passport, flipping through it aggressively, as if looking for a reason to deny him. Finding none, she shoved it back across the counter. "Go," she muttered, already looking past him to the next person. Adrian walked down the jet bridge, feeling the familiar tightening in his chest. The tax. The invisible tax he paid every time he entered a room he didn't belong in. He shook it off. He was in 1A. He would put on noise-canceling headphones, drink a whiskey, and wake up in Switzerland. He stepped onto the plane. The first-class cabin of the Regal Horizon on 87 was a sanctuary of soft, cream leather and walnut trim. Standing at the galley entrance was the lead purser, Sheila. Sheila was a woman who wore her authority like a weapon. Her uniform was immaculate, her blonde bob was sprayed into a helmet of perfection, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. It stopped at her teeth. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Bentley," she cooed to Chad, taking his cashmere coat with the reverence of a museum curator. "Can I get you a pre-departure champagne? Perhaps a hot towel, double-scotch neat, and make sure no one rescenes into me," Chad barked, dropping into seat 1F across the aisle from Adrian. "Of course, sir," Sheila beamed. Then she turned. Her eyes landed on Adrian. The smile vanished instantly. It was like a light switch had been flicked off. Adrian stepped forward. "Good evening." Sheila blocked the aisle slightly. "Boarding pass?" I scanned it at the gate. "Sat 1A. I need to see it again," she said, her voice clipped. Adrian unlocked his phone and showed her. She stared at it for a long 5 seconds, analyzing the date, The flight number, the name. Adrian Scott. The name meant nothing to her. She handed the phone back without looking at him. Overhead bins are full. She lied. The bin above 1A was wide open. You'll have to check that bag. The bin is empty, Sheila Adrian said, reading her name tag. He didn't ask. He reached up and placed his backpack in the bin. Sheila's jaw tightened. Fine, but take your seat immediately. We are trying to keep the aisle clear for priority passengers. Adrian sat. The seat was comfortable, a pot of luxury. He exhaled, closing his eyes. He heard Sheila's heels clicking on the floor. She returned with a crystal glass of amber liquid and a steaming white towel. She placed them on Chad's tray table. Here you go, Mr. Bentley. Let me know if you need anything at all. She turned and walked back toward the galley. Adrian waited and waited. Usually the flight attendant would come to 1A next, but Sheila walked right past him to seat 2F, then 2A. She took drink orders. She hung up coats. She chatted about the weather in Zurich. She circled the entire first-class cabin, 12 seats. She served 11 people. Adrian sat there, his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't thirsty, not really, but it was the principle. He pressed the call button. Ding. Sheila stuck her head out of the galley, saw the light over 1A, and ignored it. She began arranging newspapers. Ding. She sighed loudly enough for the front cabin to hear and stomped over. She didn't lean in. She stood tall, looking down her nose at him. Yes, I think you missed me during the pre-departure service, Adrian said calmly. Could I get a sparkling water, please? We are preparing for takeoff, sir. The bar is closed. You just served the gentleman in 2A at Gin and Tonic 30 seconds ago. That order was placed prior to the cutoff. Sheila lied smoothly. You'll have to wait until we're in the air. Put your seatbelt on. She turned on her heel and walked away. Across the aisle, Chad Bentley chuckled. He raised his glass of scotch toward Adrian, a mocking toast. Rough luck, buddy. Maybe they treat you better in the back of the bus. Adrian didn't look at Chad. He didn't look at Sheila. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black notebook and a fountain pen. He wrote down date deck, 14 flight RH402, lead purser. Sheila, Incident 1, denied service, hostile demeanor. He closed the book. The plane pushed back from the gate. Adrian stared out the window at the rain. They thought he was trapped in a metal tube with them. They thought he was powerless at 30,000 feet. They had no idea that the in-flight Wi-Fi was about to turn on. The seatbelt sign pinged off as the aircraft leveled out over the Atlantic. The cabin darkened, save for the soft ambient lighting. The smell of warmed nuts and expensive wine began to drift through the air. Adrian opened his laptop. He wasn't watching a movie. He was pulling up the organizational chart of Regal Horizon Holdings. He had acquired the majority stake through a shell corporation, Vanguard Ventures, just that morning. The paperwork was filed, the funds transferred, but the public announcement wasn't scheduled until Monday. Technically, right now, nobody knew he was the owner. To the crew, he was just a guy in a hoodie. To the board of directors, he was the new emperor. Sheila moved through the cabin with the dinner cart. She was all smiles and grace for Chad, offering him the Filt minion, laughing at his unfunny jokes about the stock market. When she reached 1A, her face went rigid again. Beef or pasta? She asked, looking at the wall. Beef, please. We're out of the beef. Adrian looked at the cart. He could see 3 foil trays, marked beef, right on the top shelf. There are 3 right there. Adrian pointed. Those are reserved for our diamond members, Sheila snapped. It's pasta or nothing. Pasta is fine, Adrian said. She slammed the tray down. The sauce splashed slightly onto the linen tablecloth. She didn't apologize. She dropped a bread roll onto the tray with her bare fingers, skipping the tongs she had used for everyone else. Adrian didn't eat. He pushed the tray aside and continued typing. He was currently drafting an email to the VP of Human Resources, asking for the file on a Sheila based out of JFK. The tension in the cabin was palpable, but it was silent until Chad Bentley decided he was bored. Chad had downed 4 scotches in the first hour. He was loud, belligerent, and had been side-eyeing Adrian the entire flight. Chad stood up to use the lavatory, stumbling slightly. He brushed past Adrienne's pod, his hand dragging heavily along the privacy shell. When Chad returned 5 minutes later, the drama began. "Hey!" Chad shouted. The entire cabin jumped. Sheila came running from the galley. "Mr. But Bentley, is everything all right?" "My watch," Chad yelled, patting his wrist, and then frantically searching his seat. "My Rolex. I took it off to wash my hands in the bathroom, and I put it right here on the armrest before I left. It's gone." "Are you sure?" Sir Sheila asked, her voice soothing. "I'm positive. It's a Daytona. It's worth $40,000. It didn't just walk away." Chad's watery, bloodshot eyes scanned the floor, and then they locked onto Adrian. "He took it," Chad said, pointing a shaking finger. Adrian didn't look up from his screen. "I haven't left my seat, Chad. Check your pockets." "Don't tell me what to do." Chad lunged forward, but Sheila held him back. "He was the only one near my seat. I saw him eyeing it earlier." Sheila turned to Adrian. The mask was completely off now. There was a glint of triumph in her eyes. She finally had a valid reason to go after him. "Sir?" Sheila said, her voice icy and loud enough for economy to hear. "Stand up." Adrian saved his document. He slowly removed his headphones. "I didn't take his watch, Sheila, and I'm not standing up. You are accused of theft aboard a federal aircraft," Sheila said, reciting a manual she clearly enjoyed enforcing. "I have the authority to search your immediate area. Stand up, or I will have the captain restrain you." "You want to search me?" Adrian asked. "Based on the word of a drunk man." "Mr. Bentley is a respected frequent flyer," Sheila spat. "You are well. We can all see what you are. Empty your pockets now." Adrian stared at her. He saw the prejudice etched into the lines of her face. He saw the joy she took in humiliating him. "Okay," Adrian said softly. He stood up. He turned his pockets inside out. A phone, a wallet, a pair of AirPods, no watch. "Check his bag," Chad screamed. He put it in that ratty backpack. Sheila reached for Adrian's bag in the overhead bin. "Don't touch my property," Adrian warned. His voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a shout, it was a rumble. "If you open that bag without a warrant, you are violating my civil rights, and you are breaking airline policy regarding passenger property." Sheila hesitated. She looked at Chad, then at Adrian. She made a choice. "Captain," she called out. The cockpit door opened. Captain Marshall emerged. He was a silver-haired man, with the jawline of a soap opera star and the arrogance to match. He adjusted his hat, looking at the scene. "What is the problem here?" "Sheila, Mr. Bentley's Rolex has been stolen," Sheila said, pointing at Adrian. "This passenger refuses to let us search his bag. He's being combative." Captain Marshall looked at Adrian. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a problem. "Son," Marshall said, using the most condescending word in the English language. "We have 3 hours until Zurich. I can have the Swiss Federal Police waiting at the jet bridge to strip search you and drag you to a cell. Or you can let Sheila look in the bag. We give Mr. Bentley his watch back, and maybe we don't file charges." Adrian looked at the captain. "You're making a mistake, Captain Marshall. A career-ending mistake." Marshall laughed, a dry, humorless bark. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening the flight crew? That's a federal offense. Sheila, get the zip ties. We're restraining him for the remainder of the flight." "I am not threatening you," Adrian said, sitting back down and crossing his legs. "I'm telling you that you are about to disturb the wrong hornet's nest." "Restrain him," Marshall ordered. As Sheila moved forward with plastic flex cuffs, Adrienne held up a hand. "Wait before you do that. Chad, check the gap between your seat cushion and the console." "What?" Chad slurred. "The gap you were reclining." It slid down. Chad yelled, but he shoved his hand down the side of the seat. He grunted, dug deeper, and then froze. He pulled his hand out. The silver Rolex Daytona glittered under the cabin lights. The silence that followed was deafening. Chad didn't apologize. He just strapped the watch back on and muttered, "Must have slipped." He sat down and turned away. Captain Marshall stood there, looking foolish. Sheila looked furious that she didn't get to use the cuffs. "Sit down," Marshall told Adrian, pointing a finger at him, as if Adrian was still the one in the wrong. "One more word out of you, and we divert this plane. Do you understand?" They didn't apologize. Marshall went back to the cockpit. Sheila stormed back to the galley. Adrian sat alone in the silence of 1A. His heart was hammering, but his face was stone. He opened his laptop again. He connected to the premium Wi-Fi. He didn't check his email this time. He opened a secure messaging app used by the board of directors. He typed a message to Arthur Pendleton, the current CEO of Regal Horizon, who was currently asleep in New York. Message: Arthur, wake up. We have a situation on Flight 4002. I need the full crew manifest their employee IDs, and I need you to have the Zurich station manager meet me at the gate personally, Arthur replied 2 minutes later. Adrian, good God, it's 3 a.m. What's wrong? Are you on the plane, Adrian? Yes, and by the time we land, I'm going to need you to fire the entire crew. But first, I want them to know exactly who I am. Adrian looked at the galley curtain, where Sheila was gossiping with the other flight attendants. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. He typed one last instruction to the CEO. Adrian, don't fire them yet. Send a message to the cockpit via AAR's aircraft communications addressing and reporting system. I want the captain to receive a priority message from corporate headquarters. Arthur, what should it say? Adrian, tell him the new owner of the airline is on board. Tell him he's sitting in seat 1A, and tell him to come out and apologize before I liquidate his pension. Adrian hit send. He leaned back, sipping the warm water they had left him hours ago. The destruction was about to begin. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had settled into a toxic quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, charged with unsaid words and lingering resentment. Most passengers were asleep, their lie flatbeds, fully extended eye masks on. But Adrian Scott was wide awake. He sat upright in seat 1A, the soft blue glow of his laptop illuminating his face. He wasn't working anymore. He was watching. He watched as Sheila, the lead purser, moved through the cabin like a warden on patrol. She checked on Chad Bentley in 1F, tucking a stray corner of his blanket with maternal tenderness. She refilled the water glass of the woman in 2A. When she passed 1A, her demeanor shifted physically. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and she accelerated her pace, looking strictly forward. She was making a point of ignoring him, treating him as an invisible contaminant in her pristine domain. She stopped at the galley curtain, whispering loudly to Greg, the junior flight attendant. I'm telling you, Greg, I'm filing a report the second we land. He's aggressive. I felt threatened. Did you see how he looked at me when I asked to check his bag? That's level 1 interference behavior. I want him blacklisted. Greg, a young man who looked terrified of Sheila, just nodded. Are you sure, Sheila? He's been pretty quiet since the watch thing. That's how they are. Sheila hissed, unaware that the acoustics of the pressurized cabin carried her voice straight to Adrian's ears. Quiet until they snap. I'm not taking chances. I'm telling the captain to radio ahead for airport security. I want him escorted off. Adrian didn't react. He didn't flinch. He just looked at the timestamp on his laptop. 314 MST. Up in the flight deck, the mood was significantly more relaxed. Captain Marshall had his feet up on the lower rungs of the console, a half-eaten sandwich balancing on his knee. The Boeing 787 was flying itself, cruising smoothly at 39,000 feet over the dark Atlantic. Guy's a total amateur. Marshall chuckled to his first officer, Rick, trying to tell me about civil rights at 30,000 feet. I should have cuffed him just to teach him a lesson about maritime law. You think he'll sue? Rick asked, scanning the instruments. Let him try. Marshall scoffed. It's his word against the captain's. Regal Horizon protects its pilots. Besides, who is he? Some kid in a hoodie. Probably spent his life savings on the ticket just to flex on Instagram. We'll have the Swiss police rattle him a bit. Put the fear of God in him, and he'll be begging to go home. Marshall took a bite of his sandwich. Pass me the coffee, would you? Rick reached for the pot, but his hand froze. Zazette. Zazette. The AAR's Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System printer in the center console. Word to life. In the middle of the ocean, AAR's messages were usually routine. Weather updates, turbulence reports, gate changes. But this one was different. The printer didn't stop with a short strip of paper. It kept printing, and printing, High traffic tonight, Marshall asked, annoyed. Rick tore the paper off as the machine finally fell silent. He squinted at it in the dim light of the cockpit. It's from HQ, Rick said, his voice confused. Priority 1 red tag. Red tag, Marshall frowned, putting his sandwich down. That's for emergencies. Mechanical failures, bomb threats. What does it say? Rick read the first line and his eyebrows shot up into his hairline. He didn't speak. He just handed the paper to Marshall. Marshall snatched it. He adjusted his reading glasses. From Office of the CEO, Regal Horizon, Global HQ, to Captain J. Marshall Flight, RH-42. Priority critical immediate action. Required message. Captain Marshall. System audit confirms new majority owner of Regal Horizon Holdings is currently on board your aircraft. Passenger manifest check seat 1A. Mr. Adrian Scott. Mr. Scott has alerted me to a serious service failure and potential harassment incident involving crew. He has requested your immediate presence. Advisement. Mr. Scott owns 51% of the airline as of all 9 or SW wars yesterday. Treat him accordingly. Do not fail this. Signed, Arthur Pendleton, CEO. The silence in the cockpit was absolute. The only sound was the rushing wind against the windshield and the hum of the avionics. Marshall read the message again, then a third time. Adrian Scott, Marshall whispered. The name felt heavy on his tongue. He grabbed the passenger manifest clipboard hanging near the window. He flipped the pages with a trembling finger. 1A Scott, Adrian status, VIP, do not move. He had missed the status code. He had been so focused on the hoodie, on the skin color, on the lack of a suit, that he hadn't looked at the codes. Rick Marshall said his voice was no longer the booming baritone of an arrogant captain. It was thin, ready. Did we cuff him? No, Rick said, eyes wide. You threatened to, but we didn't do it. Oh, God. Marshall exhaled, closing his eyes. I threatened to arrest the owner of the airline, Sheila, Rick said. Sheila accused him of stealing. She tried to search his bag. Marshall's eyes snapped open. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pale, sweaty gray. If the owner was in 1A, he had heard everything. He had seen everything. I have to go back there, Marshall said. He unbuckled his seatbelt. His hands were shaking so badly he fumbled with the clasp. What are you going to say? Rick asked. I don't know, Marshall said, standing up and straightening his tie. He looked at his reflection in the darkened glass. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was watching his pension evaporate in real time. I have to apologize. I have to beg. Good luck, Captain, Rick said quietly. Marshall opened the cockpit door. The rush of cabin air hit him. It felt colder than before. He stepped into the galley. Sheila was there leaning against the counter, eating a chocolate truffle she had pilored from the first-class snack basket. She smiled when she saw him. Did you radio the police, Captain? She asked eagerly. I've got the incident report drafted. I called him a disruptive, non-compliant passenger. That should cover us. Marshall looked at her. He looked at the chocolate on her lip. He looked at the malicious gleam in her eyes. For the first time in 10 years of flying with her, he didn't see a competent purser. He saw a liability, a walking lawsuit. Put the chocolate down, Sheila, Marshall said, his voice raspy. Sheila frowned. Excuse me, put it down and wipe your face, and follow me. What's going on? Sheila wiped her mouth, sensing the shift in the air. Is something wrong with the plane? No, Marshall said, staring through the curtain at the back of seat 1A. Something is wrong with us. Adrian watched the curtain twitch. He saw the captain emerge. Captain Marshall didn't stride this time. He didn't posture. He walked with the heavy, deliberate steps of a man approaching the gallows. Sheila trailed behind him, looking confused and annoyed, carrying a fresh bottle of champagne, as if that would solve whatever technical issue she thought was happening. Marshall stopped at seat 1F. Chad Bentley was awake watching a movie. Chad looked up, expecting a greeting. Hey, Cap. Smooth ride so far, Chad said, raising his glass. Marshall didn't even see him. He walked right past Chad Bentley. He stopped at seat 1A. Adrian didn't look up. He kept typing on his laptop. The slow, rhythmic clicking of the keys was the only sound in the front cabin. Mr. Scott Marshall said. Adrian finished his sentence. He hit the period key. Then he slowly closed the laptop lid. He turned his chair to face the aisle. He looked at Marshall. He didn't speak. He just waited. Marshall swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He took off his hat and held it in both hands, squeezing the brim until his knuckles turned white. To the shock of Sheila and the few awake passengers, Captain Marshall slowly lowered himself. He didn't bow. He squatted down, bringing himself to eye level with Adrian, a posture of total submission. Mr. Scott Marshall, began his voice, trembling slightly. I've just received a communication from New York, from Mr. Pendleton. I assumed you might, Adrian said. His voice was calm, devoid of anger, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Did you read it clearly, Captain Marshall? I did, sir. I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Adrian repeated the word, tasting it. Is that what we call it? When you threaten to strip search a passenger, when you threaten to have me arrested by foreign police, when you allow your staff to racially profile a paying customer. Sir, I was operating on the information I had at the time, Marshall stammered. Mr. Bentley was adamant about the theft, and Sheila. Do not blame the passenger. Adrian cut him off. And do not hide behind your crew. You are the captain. The authority on this vessel is yours. You looked at me, and you decided I was a criminal. You didn't ask for my side. You didn't investigate. You assumed Sheila was standing behind the captain, her mouth slightly open. She looked from Marshall to Adrian, her brain struggling to compute the scene. Why was the captain apologizing to the hoodie guy? Why was he calling him Mr. Scott? Captain Sheila interrupted, her voice shrill. Why are you apologizing to him? He's the one who caused the drama. He's the one who's silence. Marshall snapped, whipping his head around. The venom in his voice made Sheila jump back. Not another word, Sheila. Not one. Marshall turned back to Adrian. Mr. Scott, please. I have 30 years with this airline. I have a family. I am asking for grace. Adrian looked at Marshall. He saw the fear. It was the same fear Adrian's father had felt when he was pulled over by police for driving a nice car. The fear of losing everything because of someone else's bias. You want grace, Adrian said softly. But you gave me none. You gave me judgment. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I'm not going to have you arrested, Captain. I'm not that petty. Marshall let out a breath he had been holding. Thank you, sir. Thank you. However, Adrian continued, his eyes hardening. I don't trust your judgment, and I don't trust you to fly my planes. Your planes, Sheila whispered. Adrian finally looked at her. Yes, Sheila. My planes. Regal Horizon is a subsidiary of Scott Logistics as of yesterday morning. I own the seat you're standing next to. I own the uniform you're wearing. I own the cart you refuse to serve me from. Sheila's face went white. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was instant. Her knees actually buckled, and she had to grab the overhead bin to stay upright. The bottle of champagne in her hand tilted, threatening to spill. I didn't know, she gasped. That is the problem, Adrian said. If I were in a suit, if I were white, if I were him, he pointed at Chad, you would have treated me like a king. But because I look like this, you treated me like garbage. You don't serve customers, Sheila. You serve your own biases. Across the aisle, Chad Bentley had paused his movie. He pulled off his headphones. The realization was dawning on him, too. Wait, Chad said, leaning over. Scott, Adrian Scott. The logistics guy, the one who just bought the Atlantic shipping routes? Adrian turned his gaze to Chad. And you, he said. Chad laughed nervously. Hey, man, no hard feelings, right? Just a little mix-up with the watch. It happens. You know how it is. High stress, lot of money on the line. I do know, Adrian said. Speaking of money, you mentioned earlier you were shorting Regal Horizon stock. You were bragging about it on the phone while we boarded. Chad's smile faltered. Just market talk, you know. Well, Adrian said, leaning back in his seat, when we land, the press release about my acquisition goes live. Regal Horizon stock is going to jump about 20% at the opening bell. If you are short on this stock, Mr. Bentley, you aren't just going to lose money. You're going to be wiped out." Chad stared at him. He did the mental math. His face turned a shade of green that matched the olives in his uneaten martini. He sank back into his seat, looking like he might vomit. Adrian turned back to Captain Marshall, who was still crouching. "Captain, return to the cockpit. Fly this plane safely to Zurich. Do not speak to me again for the duration of the flight." "Yes, sir," Marshall whispered. He stood up on shaky legs. "And Sheila?" Sheila flinched. "Yes, sir. I asked for a sparkling water 4 hours ago. I'm still waiting." Sheila scrambled. She didn't walk. She ran to the galley. Her hands shook so violently that she shattered the first glass she touched. She didn't care. She poured another. She placed it on a silver tray with a linen napkin. She brought it to him, her head bowed low. "Here you are, Mr. Scott." "I am so sorry." Adrian didn't thank her. He didn't look at her. He took the glass and turned his attention back to the window. The sun was beginning to rise over the Swiss Alps, painting the sky in hues of violent purple and gold. It was beautiful. The rest of the flight was conducted in a terrified silence. The crew moved like ghosts, afraid to make a sound. Every time Adrian shifted in his seat, 3 flight attendants looked over, ready to sprint if he needed so much as a napkin. But Adrian didn't ask for anything else. He just watched the mountains get closer. As the wheels deployed with a mechanical thud, Adrian checked his phone one last time. He had a message from the Zurich station manager. "Mr. Scott, we are ready at the gate. The board has been notified of the situation. Security is present, but not for you." The plane touched down. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive machine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Marshall's voice came over the intercom. It sounded cracked and broken. "Welcome to Zurich. Local time is 7 a.m. We thank you for flying Regal Horizon." He didn't say we hope to see you again. He knew he wouldn't. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Chad Bentley grabbed his bag and tried to bolt for the door, desperate to get to a phone and call his broker. "Sit down, Chad," Adrian said calmly. Chad froze. "I have to go. I have to cover my position." "You can wait," Adrian said. "First-class D planes in order of priority." Adrian stood up. He adjusted his hoodie. He picked up his backpack. He walked to the cabin door. Sheila was standing there, holding the door release. She looked like she was about to cry. "Have a good day, Mr. Scott," she whispered. Adrian stopped. He looked her in the eye. "You too, Sheila. Enjoy it. It's a beautiful city." The door opened. The cool Swiss air rushed in. Standing at the end of the jet bridge wasn't just a gate agent. It was a phalanx of suits. 6 men and women in dark blazers flanking a tall, severe-looking man with silver hair. Karl Vogel, the Zurich station manager. Behind them stood 2 Swiss federal police officers. The passengers behind Adrian craned their necks to see who was in trouble. They assumed the police were there for the hoodie guy. Adrian stepped onto the jet bridge. Karl Vogel stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. Mr. Scott Vogel said, his voice echoing in the tunnel. "Welcome to Zurich. Mr. Pendleton briefed us." "Good morning," Karl Adrian said. "The car is waiting on the tarmac," Sir Vogel said. Then he looked past Adrian into the plane. "And regarding the crew," Adrian didn't look back. "Hold the entire flight crew here. They are not to leave the jet bridge until HR has processed them." "And the passenger?" "In 1F, Mr. Bentley." "Yes, sir. He has a massive short position against our stock. I believe that constitutes a conflict of interest for our premium loyalty program. Revoke his status. Lifetime ban. He can fly home on another carrier." "Understood." "Immediately, sir." Adrian walked down the stairs to the waiting tarmac limousine. He didn't watch as the police stepped onto the plane, not to arrest anyone, but to escort the crew to a very small, very quiet room for their termination interviews. The real karma wasn't the firing. That was just business. The real karma was about to happen in the boardroom of the Regal Horizon Zurich HQ. Adrian checked his tie in the reflection of the limo window. It was time to go to work. The jet bridge at Zurich International Airport is usually a place of transit, a fleeting tunnel between the sky and the ground. But for the crew of Flight RH-402, it had become a holding cell. The last of the economy passengers had deplaned, casting curious glances at the pilot and flight attendants, standing awkwardly against the wall, guarded by the station manager, Carl Vogel. Captain Marshall stood with his arms crossed, trying to maintain a facade of authority, but his hands were tucked into his armpits to hide their trembling. Sheila stared at the floor, her mascara beginning to smudge the perfect mask of the lead purser, finally cracking. "Carl," Marshall said, his voice low, "this is highly irregular. We have union rights. You can't detain us on the bridge like criminals. I need to get to the crew hotel. I'm over my duty hours." Carl Vogel, a man known for his Swiss precision and lack of humor, checked his tablet. He didn't look up. "You are not going to the crew hotel, Captain. Your rooms have been canceled." "Canceled," Marshall sputtered. "Where are we supposed to sleep?" "That is a personal matter," Carl said coldly. "As of 10 minutes ago, your company credit cards have been deactivated. Your return tickets to New York have been voided." Sheila let out a small, strangled sob. You're stranding us here." "No," Carl corrected. "We are processing you. Corporate security is on its way to collect your badges, your uniforms, and your airport ID cards. You will be escorted to the landside terminal. From there, you are private citizens in a foreign country. How you get home is not Regal Horizon's concern. This is illegal." Marshall shouted, his face flushing red. "I have flown for 30 years. You can't fire me on a jet bridge because the new owner got his feelings hurt." Carl finally looked up. His eyes were like ice. "You weren't fired because his feelings were hurt. Captain, you are being terminated for gross negligence and discrimination. The cockpit voice recorder data has already been pulled remotely. We heard you." Carl took a step closer. "We heard you call him a kid in a hoodie. We heard you threaten to arrest him without cause. We heard you laugh about it. In Switzerland, Captain, and under the new Scott governance, that is not a mistake. That is a liability." Two large men in dark suits appeared at the top of the ramp. "Corporate security." "Hand over your badges," Carl ordered. Slowly, painfully, Captain Marshall reached up. He unclipped the plastic ID that had defined his existence for 3 decades. He handed it over. It felt like he was handing over his own hand. Sheila followed suit, her fingers shaking so hard she dropped the badge twice before Carl snatched it from the floor. "Please," Sheila whispered. "I have a mortgage. I'm a single in-home household." "You should have thought about that when you refused him water," Carl said. "Escort them out." While the crew was being stripped of their identities in the tunnel, a different kind of destruction was happening in the terminal. Chad Bentley was sprinting. He was sweating through his cashmere coat, his briefcase banging against his leg as he ran toward the Senator Lounge. He needed Wi-Fi, he needed a phone line, he needed alcohol. He reached the lounge reception breathless. He slapped his boarding pass and his platinum card on the marble counter. "Let me in," Chad panted. "I need a private booth now." The lounge attendant, a young woman with impeccable posture, scanned his boarding pass. The machine let out a harsh, dissonant buzz. A red light flashed. She frowned and scanned it again. Buzz. "Sir, this boarding pass is invalid." "It's not invalid. I just got off the plane." "I'm a Diamond member," Chad yelled. "Scan it again." "I'm sorry, Mr. Bentley," she said, looking at her screen. "Your status has been revoked. The system lists you as banned." "Banned? That's impossible." "Do you know how much money I spend with this airline? I cannot admit you, sir." "Please step aside." "Fine," Chad screamed. He grabbed his phone. His hands were shaking violently. He opened his trading app. It was 9:31 a.m. in New York. The markets had just opened. On the screen, a news banner was flashing in bright red. Breaking. Scott Logistics acquires Regal Horizon Airlines. Stock surges. Chad stared at the ticker. He had shorted the stock. He had bet millions that the price would go down using borrowed money, leverage. Because of Adrian's acquisition news, the stock didn't go down. It didn't stay flat. It rocketed. It was up 18% in the first minute of trading. "No," Chad whispered. "No, no, no." He watched the numbers turn red on his portfolio. The line went straight down. $200,000, $800,000, $1.5 million. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his brokerage. Margin call. Immediate liquidation warning. Sell. Chad screamed at his phone, tapping the glass frantically. Cover the position. Buy it back. But the volatility was too high. The orders weren't filling fast enough. The price kept climbing. 22%, 25%. His broker was calling. Chad answered, putting it on speaker, oblivious to the people staring at him in the terminal. Chad the broker shouted, "What is happening?" "The stock is mooning. Your entire account is wiped out. We have to liquidate your other holdings to cover the margin. You're going to owe the firm $3 million. Don't sell the house," Chad cried, sinking to his knees on the polished airport floor. "Don't sell the Tesla puts." "It's gone, Chad. It's all gone." "Why didn't you close the position yesterday?" Chad dropped the phone. He sat there, a man in a $5,000 coat surrounded by luxury duty-free shops, absolutely penniless. He looked up at the departure screen. A news ticker at the bottom scrolled by. Adrian Scott becomes youngest airline owner in history. Promises new era of dignity for aviation. Chad put his head in his hands and wept. 30 minutes later, the atmosphere in the Regal Horizon boardroom was suffocating. This room was the inner sanctum of the airline. High above Zurich, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway, it was a place of mahogany leather and silence. 12 board members sat around the long oval table. These were men and women of the old guard. They wore bespoke suits, checked their vintage watches, and whispered nervously to one another. They had sold the company, yes, but they hadn't expected the buyer to arrive today, and they certainly hadn't expected the reports filtering in from the tarmac. The double doors opened. The room went silent. Adrian Scott walked in. He hadn't changed. He was still wearing the Howard University hoodie, the joggers, the sneakers. He hadn't showered. He looked exhausted, but he walked with a predator's grace. He didn't walk to the guest chair. He walked to the head of the table, the chairman's seat. He stood behind the leather chair, gripping the back of it with both hands. He looked at the faces around the table. He saw confusion. He saw judgment. He saw the same look Brenda at the gate had given him. "Sit down," Adrian said. It wasn't a request. The board members, who had half risen to shake hands, sank back into their chairs. "My name is Adrian Scott." He began, his voice raspy but clear. "I own this building. I own the planes outside, and as of this morning, I own your jobs." He pulled the chair out and sat down. He placed the small black notebook on the table. "I just flew 7 hours on my own airline," Adrian said. "Flight 402, first class seat, 1A. He opened the notebook. "I was ignored for 45 minutes. I was denied food that was sitting 3 feet away from me. I was accused of theft. I was threatened with arrest by my own captain." A gasp went around the table. Arthur Pendleton, the former CEO, who was staying on for the transition, looked pale. "Adrian," Arthur said, we heard there was an incident. We had no idea it was this severe. We will issue a formal apology immediately." "I don't want an apology," Adrian said. "I want an autopsy." Adrian tapped the table with his finger. "This didn't happen because one flight attendant was having a bad day. It happened because of the culture you people built." He looked at the board member for customer experience, a woman named Elena. Elena Adrienne said. "What is the company policy on high-value suspects?" Eleanor stammered. Excuse me." "The training manual," Adrian said. "I read it on the flight page 44. It encourages crew to visually assess passengers for class congruency to prevent fraud. That is corporate speak for profiling. That is why your purser thought she could treat me like a criminal." Adrian stood up again. He walked over to the window, looking down at the planes taxiing below. "You built an airline that worships a suit and fears a hoodie. You built a system where a drunk man in a cashmere coat is treated like a god and a sober black man is treated like a threat." He turned back to them. "That ends today." "I am grounding the entire executive leadership team," Grounding Arthur asked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Adrian said, "that none of you are allowed to fly private anymore. None of you are allowed to fly first class." He smiled a cold, sharp smile. "For the next 6 months, every person in this room will fly economy. Middle seats only." "You can't be serious." One board member protested. "We have meetings. We need to work. If you want to work for me," Adrian said, "you will see the product from the back of the bus. You will eat the cold pasta. You will wait for the water that never comes." Adrian walked back to the head of the table. He picked up a remote control and pointed it at the large screen on the wall. "But before we get to the restructuring," Adrian said, "I want to show you the cost of your culture." He pressed a button. A live video feed popped up on the screen. It was a security camera view of the terminal downstairs. The camera was zoomed in on a specific bench near the exit. Sitting there, looking small and defeated, were Captain Marshall and Sheila. They were sitting on their suitcases, still in uniform, but stripped of their badges. People were walking past them, ignoring them. They looked lost. "That is Captain John Marshall," Adrian said. 30 years of experience? And Sheila Evans, 20 years. They are currently unemployed. Their pensions are frozen pending investigation. They are stranded in Zurich with no ticket home. The room watched the feed in silence. It was a pathetic sight. "I didn't fire them because they were rude," Adrian said quietly. "I fired them because they were comfortable. They were comfortable being cruel because they thought the system would protect them." Adrian turned off the screen. The room went black. "The system has changed," Adrian whispered in the darkness. "The person in seat 1A is no longer just a passenger. He is the judge." He looked at Arthur. "Get me a fresh shirt, Arthur, and get the press in here. We have an announcement to make." Adrian sat back in the chair. He finally closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over him. He had destroyed the rot. Now he had to rebuild the house. But first, he was going to enjoy the silence. The press conference was chaos. Flashes popped like strobe lights, and reporters shouted over one another, their voices echoing in the glass atrium of the Zurich headquarters. The world wanted to see the mysterious billionaire who had grounded his own executives and fired a flight crew mid-trip. Adrian Scott stepped onto the podium. He wasn't wearing a suit. He had changed into a clean, crisp black t-shirt and jeans. He looked fresh, energized, and ready for war. "Mr. Scott," a reporter from the Financial Times shouted, "is it true you fired a captain for following security protocol? Are you worried about a wrongful termination lawsuit?" Adrian leaned into the microphone. The room went dead silent. "I didn't fire him for following protocol," Adrian said, his voice steady. "I fired him for confusing prejudice with protocol. Security is about identifying threats. When you look at a paying customer and see a threat solely based on their appearance, you aren't doing security. You're doing oppression." He paused, looking directly into the camera lens. "Regal Horizon is dead. As of this moment, we are rebranding. The company will be known as Scott Air. And our new motto isn't fly first class. It is fly with dignity." Adrian stepped back as the room erupted. Later that evening, Adrian sat alone in the first-class lounge, the same lounge Chad Bentley had been kicked out of. He held a glass of whiskey, watching the runway lights twinkle in the twilight. His phone buzzed. It was an email from Sheila. Subject: apology, Mr. Scott. "I know it's too late, but I wanted to say that you were right. I've been flying for 20 years, and somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people. I only saw tickets. I am ashamed. I will find my own way home." Adrian read it twice. He didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't something he owed her. It was something she had to earn for herself. He looked out at the tarmac. A Regal Horizon jet was being towed into the hangar. Tomorrow the painters would arrive. They would strip away the old logo, the old colors, the old rot. They would paint it black and gold, the colors of Scott Air. Adrian took a sip of his drink. He had walked onto that plane as a ghost. He was leaving as the king. He typed one final message to his assistant in New York. Send a car for Sheila and Marshall. Get them economy tickets home on a competitor airline. Let them sit in the middle seat. Let them feel what it's like to be small. Maybe by the time they land, they'll be ready to be human again. He closed his phone. The boarding call for his flight home began. This time, when Adrian walked to the gate, the agent didn't ask him to step aside. She smiled. She checked his pass. And she said the words he had waited his whole life to hear. "Welcome home, Mr. Scott. The cabin is yours. So what's the real lesson here? It's not just about don't judge a book by its cover. It's about power. Real power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be rude to waiters or flash a Rolex. Real power is quiet. It's confident. And as Adrian Scott showed us, real power is having the ability to destroy your enemies without ever raising your voice. Chad Bentley lost his fortune because he bet against the underdog. The captain lost his career because he underestimated the quiet man in seat 1A. And Adrian, he proved that the most dangerous person in the room is usually the one everyone is ignoring. If you enjoyed this story of massive corporate revenge and instant karma, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Have you ever been judged based on how you look? Or have you ever seen someone get instant karma at an airport? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind to everyone. You never know who you're talking to. See you in the next.